like to call this meeting to order, and first to say a word of welcome to all of you who are here today. I personally am so grateful that all of you are attending today. This is a very important meeting in which we will first hear comments from our new president, Robert Berdahl, and you'll have a chance then to give questions and comments from the floor. And then Chancellor Pernsteiner and Allyn Ford, the chair of the Presidential Search Committee, will be making brief presentations and also receiving your questions and comments. So thank you so much for participating in this meeting today. Our first point of order is the approval of the minutes of the November 30th and December 7th meetings. Do I hear any discussion of those minutes? Does anybody have any discussion? May I have a motion for the approval of the minutes? Second. Vote. All in favor, say aye. Opposed, nay. Abstain. The minutes are so approved. Today is a special occasion because this is the first time that we will engage with our new president, Robert Berdahl, in a public forum. And I would first like to say that I'm thrilled that Bob has accepted this position, which comes at a very special time in his life. And I think it shows his confidence in all of us as a university community and in this university for what we know it to be and for the future that we are together creating for it and through it. And I think we owe him a great debt of gratitude for accepting this position and for leading us at this very, very important time. Thank you so much, Bob. And now Bob will make some comments from the podium and then receive your questions and your comments as well.
Well, I hesitate to correct the Senate President on my first moment at the podium, but I'm not the President, I'm just the interim President. I want to stress the interim aspect of that position. I'm delighted to be here this afternoon, although, as you know, I'm not particularly pleased with the circumstances that have led to my being here today. I am pleased with the opportunity to return to the University of Oregon and to participate once again in this really wonderful and, I think, spectacularly interesting university. I want to apologize in advance to everyone here because as an interim president, I'm probably not going to get the time to go to every department and office and meet as many staff and faculty as I would like to meet in what I hope to be a relatively short tenure as interim president. But I will try to get around as much as I can and try to attend meetings where we can get acquainted and I can know some of your goals and aspirations and your hopes for the university. But it is a busy time, and it's a time that I want to spend the few months that I have as president as productively as possible. I'm very honored that the faculty represented by the Senate was in favor of my appointment as interim president. Absence, it is said, makes the heart grow fonder. In fact, I suspect absence only makes the memory go fainter. So that somehow whatever memory remains of my earlier incarnation here is colored more favorably than it probably should be. People seem to have exaggerated their estimation of me. When I talked with Chancellor Pernsteiner about taking this position, he said the Senate seems to think you're the second coming. I said, well, it is my second coming to the University of Oregon, but not with a capital S and a capital C. And I suspect that by September, my reputation here won't be as strong as it is now. Such is the case with most presidents. On the other hand, honeymoons frequently last 9 months, so if we can keep this marriage happily together, I may escape without you entirely regretting your recommendation to the Board of Higher Education. Last night, as I was settling in to write some brief remarks for today at McMorran House, I chanced to pick up a brochure of the history of the University of Oregon's president's residence, McMorran House, and to learn, to my surprise, that of the 12 presidents who used McMorran House since 1941, it's been in our family, the family of the university, for all of those years. Over those 70 years, and I followed closely in the years since I came to Oregon in 1967, the affairs of this university, both as a faculty member and as an outside champion. I've known reasonably well and worked in some fashion with 6 out of the 12. That tells you a little bit about how old I am. But it is the case that and my pages are all mixed up here now, so I'm going to have to straighten this out, because I want to list the presidents that I worked with, but I have worked with that, I guess I didn't check, it isn't, that page is entirely missing, so we'll try to go on from here. In fact, not only is that page missing, but a whole lot are missing. So you're going to get a little bit of off-the-cuff stuff here. I began when Arthur Fleming was president of the University of Oregon. He was then followed by Bill Boyd, and I began working more closely when Paul Allyn was president, and I became dean under his presidency, and have known and worked closely with Miles Brand, who was a dean when I was a dean in the Pac-10 at that time, and then provost together in the Big Ten. We worked together there. And I have known Dave Frohnmeyer for 40 years, since we were young faculty members on this campus. Admired enormously his work as president of the university, and his work with me at AAU, where he served with distinction on the executive committee. And I worked closely, as you know, with Richard LaRiviere, and admired him enormously as well. So I feel like I am standing on the shoulders of people who had very, very long visions about the future of this university, and could look well into the future. And we're very visionary leaders in each case. The University of Oregon has been blessed, at least up to this point, with very, very good leadership. And I think that you can all be proud of that tradition. But we know in the final analysis that the strength of the university is not dependent upon who happens to be the president or the interim president. It is dependent on all of you, the staff, above all the faculty, the students. The quality of an institution is dependent in large part on the quality of its faculty. It is the faculty. As one of the Nobel laureates who was on the Berkeley faculty once commented, Y.T. Lee, a distinguished Nobel laureate in chemistry, he said, "I came to Berkeley as a student because of the quality of the faculty. I returned to Berkeley as a faculty member because of the quality of the students." And I think that sums up in a very succinct way why the faculty matter in terms of recruiting the very best students, and why the quality of the students matter in terms of recruiting the very best faculty. We are, I think, extremely fortunate in many ways at this point because we have an opportunity to recruit faculty that exists at very, very few public universities in the United States today. Because of some, I think, very good financial management, because of a budget plan and a business plan that the university has formulated, we are now recruiting in the College of Arts and Sciences at least 35 faculty. Many of those are new positions. And the same holds true in some portion or some degree in all of the professional schools as well. That's an opportunity that few public universities today have. Very few are adding to their faculty. And many are not even replacing losses. So we have an opportunity here, it seems to me, at a moment in time that this university, and we need to, obviously, because our resources are stretched thin. We have a very large student body, the largest in history and larger than anticipated. But we have an opportunity that rarely occurs. And it is really the responsibility, so clearly, of the faculty to recruit the very, very best faculty. I said to the deans this morning, this is the moment when we should make certain that our standards are high, and that if we don't get our first choices in the searches, we shouldn't settle for someone who isn't top-notch, because that position will be there again next year, and we will have an opportunity to fill it with top-notch people. I think the mark of a mature faculty and a good faculty, an outstanding faculty, is the willingness to hire people who are better than we are. Sometimes that doesn't happen. Sometimes faculty are resistant to that. But I think that this faculty is up to that and should be challenged to do it, because you do have an opportunity here to recruit outstanding faculty that will lay the foundation for the future of this institution. So I see my first task here as interim president in assisting in that process in any way that we can, whether that's meeting with candidates who are here, whether that's talking with you about how we can muster the resources to make these recruitments successful. It's extremely important, it seems to me, that we do that. That is how the momentum that has been gained over the past several years can be sustained. That's how our future, I think, can be ensured. So I challenge you and I urge you to use this opportunity wisely and carefully and seize the moment to hire the very best. It's a good opportunity to be hiring because not very many places are doing it. Second, as I see my responsibility here, it's also to help recruit a strong, visionary, effective leader as the next president of the University of Oregon. The search process is getting underway, and you will hear from Board Member Ford and Chancellor Pernsteiner exactly how the process will proceed, what the campus will be doing. They are here to answer your questions, and they're here to interact with you about the search process. I clearly have an interest in not only the outcome of this process, but seeing to it that it's completed in the time frame that I have as interim. But I also believe that the campus has an interest in doing this as fast as it can too. It is not, interim presidents, however effective we may hope we are or try to be, are still interim. There's still an interregnum, and people are still going to be waiting and watching to see who the permanent person is. So it's important, it seems to me, to maintain the momentum during the next 9 to 12 months, but make certain in that process that we recruit a strong and effective president. Although morale has, I think, clearly been damaged by the board's decision, it is generally high on this campus because of this momentum, because of the hope and the expectation that has been raised for the future of the institution. One of my tasks as a presidential consultant this fall was to help in planning the upcoming capital campaign, and I met with all of the deans and a number of the faculty. Contrary to one of the truisms that one of my predecessors as president of the University of Texas cited or observed, that faculty morale is always at an all-time low, I found the faculty morale here to be very high. One associate dean in the College of Arts and Sciences commented, "I would rather be at the U of O right now than at any other public university in the United States." I hope that he can still make that statement and will make that statement. The key to keeping a sense of optimism alive is to recruit an outstanding faculty, but also to recruit an outstanding president. And I believe I can be of some help in that process, in part because my previous positions have enabled me to get acquainted with people in higher education all across the country, and I undoubtedly will know a large number of the potential candidates. And I hope to be able to play an effective role in the search process and, above all, in the recruitment process. Our third imperative, upon which the others, I think, depend, is to advance the project of gaining an independent board for the University of Oregon. I believe this is essential not only to maintain the morale of this institution, it is essential ultimately if we are to recruit the kind of faculty that we want. It is essential if we are to be able to spend the university's resources to best support our people and our projects. And it is, I believe, also essential to the successful recruitment of a strong and effective president. Given the abbreviated tenure of the last president, all the presidential candidates, at least any of whom we are interested in recruiting, I think are bound to ask whether, given the current abysmal support for the university from the state and the history of that abysmal support and the strong possibility that it may even decline further, is it possible to succeed in advancing the university given the kind of tensions that have existed? My answer is simply no. One needs to look only at the success of OHSU to realize how an institution provided with greater freedom of action can prosper. OHSU has moved from a middling medical school to being a first-rate medical school and a research center, now competing for the very best talent and with the best medical centers in the United States. I believe the University of Oregon can experience a similar leap forward. I believe there is the possibility of a major restructuring of our revenue stream that can happen if we're given the freedom to do so. I believe there is substantial support for this within the context of the governor's plan for restructuring education in Oregon, and I believe the moment is ripe for change. So I'm determined to advance this project of an independent board for the university. And since the members of the Board of Higher Education have indicated publicly as well as privately that the board's differences with President LaBrevere were not over policy but over style, I intend to work with the Chancellor and the board to achieve those policies that will yield that kind of an independent board for the university. And since this is the meeting of the University Senate, let me close with just a few words about some of my views on shared governance. You have a new constitution as a Senate that was approved in December. At this university, in a manner that is almost unique to this university, I think, the statutory faculty has included, through the creation of a broad-based university-wide Senate, many voices in fulfilling the faculty's primary responsibility in shared governance of addressing academic matters. I'm a firm believer in the principle of shared governance. In my various capacities as a faculty member or university administrator or president of the Association of American Universities, I've seen a wide range of experiences about shared governance. I've seen examples where the faculty role in shared governance was extremely weak, held so in many cases by administrative design. And I've seen cases where the principle of shared governance was present by design, but where it functioned very poorly and ineffectively because the faculty senate often was controlled by faculty who were not among the best of the faculty and did not command the kind of respect that was necessary for the successful shared governance. And as a consequence, often the best faculty refused to be involved, and the faculty senate became a playground for malcontents. As a result, mutual trust disappeared. At Berkeley, I have to tell you, and I don't mean to refer to Berkeley, but it is one of my central administrative experiences. I experienced shared governance in one of its best manifestations. Since 1920, shared governance has been a cardinal principle at Berkeley. When the faculty gained a major voice in the academic affairs of the campus, advising the president on all appointments and promotions of faculty and deans, on all curricular matters, on changes of educational policy, and on budget issues. According to one historian of shared governance at Berkeley, the faculty there enjoyed more influence on the academic direction of the university than at any other university in the country. I happen to believe that this level of shared governance has been largely successful for the excellence of Berkeley. The very best faculty at Berkeley, including Nobel laureates, had taken responsibility for maintaining the quality of the faculty and setting the standards high across every unit of the campus. While post-tenure review in some universities is seen as an invasion of the right to tenure, it is taken for granted as a principle of academic excellence at Berkeley. A powerful committee of faculty reviews every member of the faculty every 3 years and makes recommendations on all merit increases. Every appointment, every promotion is reviewed carefully by the committee, providing advice to the chancellor, and they review 900 cases a year. It is the faculty working with the administration that is largely responsible for the quality and the control of quality and the maintenance of quality at Berkeley. So I approached the newly drafted Constitution for the Faculty Senate of the U of O from this perspective on shared governance. It works best when the most respected members of the faculty are willing to assume responsibility for it. It works best when the faculty takes most seriously the job of sustaining quality of the faculty and the academic program. And it works best when it considers the administration as an ally in the quest for quality, not as its adversary. So this, it seems to me, is how we should move forward. Furthermore, I would say it works best when we engage in participatory decision-making, but where the clarity is about who then makes the decisions. If together we trust each other, faculty and administration want to build the best university we can, we may occasionally disagree about the means, but not about the ends. And I think that we can work together in a non-adversarial fashion with the faculty attending to the quality and the direction of academic policy and the administration, which also plays a role in that quality control, but taking care of the practical affairs of the university as it is defined in the task of the president. So I look forward to the next 9 months of being back on this campus. It's grown, it's gotten better since I've been gone. Perhaps that's the reason it's gotten better. But it is a treasure. It is a treasure that the state of Oregon doesn't appreciate as much as it ought to. And it is a treasure that I know you appreciate and understand. And I'm very grateful to you for the contributions that you have made to it and will make to it. and I look forward to working with you as we move forward. Well, let me stop there and answer questions. This is, after all, the Senate. You are faculty and staff. You have the right to pepper me with whatever questions. I may not answer them and say I'm too new to know the answer to that, but feel free to fire away. Who's got a question?
I'd like to ask people to come forward to the microphones, please, and ask your question. There's a microphone here, obviously where I am, and then one in the middle of the room. So please come forward, and we'll rotate through the microphones and receive your comments and questions.
Don't be shy. I'm only an interim. Please identify yourselves, too, so that I kind of know who I'm talking to a bit. Nope.
Ron Lovinger, Department of Landscape Architecture, and I wanted to thank you so much for your comments. I also arrived at the time of Arthur Fleming, and I guess that's almost 50 years ago. Of serious concern to me has been the landscape structure of the campus and the continued disintegration of walkways, roads, plantings, et cetera. And in landscape time, when we have presidents who come and go, although we got some wonderful buildings built, one of the serious issues is who is taking care of this, as you say, living landscape treasure. And I would like to think and hope that over the next few months, maybe this year, that we could very seriously look at this incredibly beautiful legacy that all of us has inherited. And instead of thinking perhaps of objects and building our individual buildings, which the campus planning process has fostered, we can start considering the meaning of relationships. Relationships of between and amongst ourselves, but also how that ideal is manifested in how we think of the commons, the landscape we share, and how we can think in landscape time as being stewards of future generations which will inherit this glorious campus. And I've been reluctant to make this point up until now, but I sense a receptivity to this ideal. And I wouldn't be making this point with such passion if I wasn't aware, increasingly aware, that in the decades that I've been here, the landscape infrastructure has disintegrated and fallen into disrepair. And I hope that this is an issue that the Senate and the faculty and students can continue to engage, and particularly the stewardship of the Willamette River and the riverfront, and how we connect with the rest of the city, and as well serve as stewards of this incredible ecosystem. So I look forward to this dialogue, and once again, thank you so much for your kind words.
Well, thank you very much for those words. Let me just simply say a little bit about some of my experience. When I came to the University of Texas, which I think has, by all measure, one of the best physical plants that I have encountered. I always said if I had the Texas physical plant and the Berkeley faculty, I'd have the best of all possible worlds. But Texas was simply plunking buildings down in open spaces. We hired Caesar Pelli and Associates to do a master plan for the development of the physical landscape of the campus. And it was, I think, one of the things I'm most proud of in my relatively short tenure at Texas, because that plan really shaped the relationship between buildings, the relationship between buildings and open space, without being slavishly committed to any particular architectural style. It nevertheless saw to it that buildings bore a relationship to one another in their architectural design. And I think it has produced a significantly better campus than, and fortunately my successors there followed through with that, and indeed the city picked up on it and redesigned the kind of town-gown interface between the university and the adjacent areas to the university. So I think you make a very, very important point. When I got to Berkeley, we did something of the same thing, not as elaborate a plan, but because we had so little space for a landlocked campus at Berkeley, we had to think very carefully about how we developed it. Clark Kerr once said that buildings at public universities don't have to be cheap, they just have to look cheap. And I once said to Clark, you succeeded beyond your wildest imagination. That was the 60s, late 50s and 60s were not a distinguished period in the history of American architecture, I think.
That's right.
And certainly many of our campuses suffered from that. But I hope that that we can undertake something of what you've suggested. It will certainly be a suggestion that if I can't complete, I will pass on to my successor.
I look forward to it. Thank you so much.
John Bonine, School of Law. I suppose I've been here through 5 previous presidents, so I came a little bit after you did. When I came, and I think it's still true very much today, our inability to offer faculty members proper salaries has resulted in a lot of recruitment that talk about the beauties of Oregon and the incredible atmosphere of the university. They called it psychic income, as I recall. Of course, you can't sell a lot of psychic income to a president that you try to recruit. So I think what you do primarily is you try to sell opportunity income. What opportunity can you give that president to make his or her mark to make things better? But the opportunity that you've just discussed depends, and I agree with you, on structure. So I suppose you're going to have to sell structural income to a new president. What I want to know is, how will you sell it? In other words, in your own role as president, you've met with the governor, you've met with the board, you've met with various other stakeholders around the state. When a potential candidate who hasn't even applied says, yeah, but. So, yeah, it'd be awfully nice to have the kind of structure you're talking about, but. What can you offer from your experience around the state, if anything, with suggestions that we'll actually be able to achieve that goal rather than just hope for it?
Well, let me answer several of the things that you've mentioned. When I came here as a young faculty member, Chuck Johnson was the Dean of Arts and Sciences, and I remember distinctly sitting in his office, and he said, I consider this location with the ocean an hour and a half away and the mountains an hour and a half away worth $2,000 a year in salary. I was paying 5 or 6 for it by the time I left, and I suspect you're paying more for it now. I would say what I said in my prepared remarks, that all public universities are undergoing tremendous stress and are undergoing newly defined relationships with their states. As the state percentage of budgets decline, they are working to renegotiate, and it's happened in several places already, like Virginia, their relationship with the state. Some universities, like Michigan, have had an independent board for most of their history. And those universities, and I have to say, I think those universities that have independent boards have flourished more. I also think that the partnership as defined, though it's going to have to be, I think, revised in some significant fashions around issues of finance that from what the original vision was. I think it still is a compelling vision as outlined by President LaRiviere, a compelling vision for what is going to have to be the case at flagship public universities across the United States. It is the flagships that have been, I think, have suffered the most as a result of state declines, in part because their cost structures are so much more expensive, in part because of the leveling influences of systems, and I've seen it everywhere, and I've given lectures on this topic, on the role of flagships and the problems that flagships encounter within systems, and you need to look only at Wisconsin, which just went through a very similar experience to what Oregon has been through. So I think there is a struggle that is going on about how we sustain the public mission of public universities with a different governance and a different revenue structure. It's happening almost everywhere in the country. I think there's no place where the percentage of operating budget from the state is as low as it is in Oregon, or at the University of Oregon. I don't know about the other institutions in the state. I don't know of any place where it is that doesn't have a medical school. If you have a medical school, you're churning a lot of money. So there's a real big difference in comparing our budget. But we don't have medical school. So the percentage falling below 10% into single digits, close to 5%, between 5 and 7% of state funding, is remarkably low. And it seems to me patently obvious that the state can't exercise 100% of control with 7% of the budget. So I think that the redefinition of structure is important so that a president can feel that he or she can take this institution forward, developing new sources of revenue and building on those sources of revenue to build the future. So I do think that's important. I also would have to say that there are other aspects of this institution that people discover when they come to visit. The AAU met here when Dave Frohnmeyer was president. It was one of the most successful AAU meetings we ever had, in part because the university really planned it carefully and put on a great show, in part because I think people who had come from other universities in the East Coast, who had very little awareness of this institution and its quality, came away really impressed. I think that will happen to candidates who come who don't know as much about this university as they may have before they became involved in the search process. And so there are also psychic surprises as well as psychic rewards. Let's not underestimate, even presidents kind of like to be, close to mountains and close to beach. When we first moved to Champaign-Urbana, my youngest daughter was upset about leaving Eugene. We were in a conversation with some other faculty and their kids, and the mother said, "Well, what was so special about Eugene?" And my wife said, "Well, it was equidistant from the mountains and the ocean." To which the response was, "So's Champaign-Urbana." So we do have some advantages here. Go ahead.
I think he's been waiting. President, hello. Am I on? Okay.
President Berdahl, my name's Ben Eckstein. We just met. I'm the student body president. And I have a question about, this will be a surprise, but about the student role at the university. And my question is, I know, you've been the president at UC Berkeley, which has a very active, renowned student body, very active on campus, and you're no stranger to conflict sometimes between students and administrators on a variety of issues, and I've read about some of your tenure at Berkeley, and I know that. And my question for you is, what is the role of the student in shared governance of our university and at this university? And you cite the declining level of state support for our university, and the flip side of that story is that where has that been made up for? And obviously the answer is on the backs of the students. And so in the modern day, with students footing the bill for 2/3 of the cost of their education and going into debt to get their college degree, what kind of say should students have at the University of Oregon, and what will you do as the interim president in your time here to reach out to students, to build relationships with students, and most importantly on the issues where students disagree with administrators, and there's a series of them right now, what will you do to make inroads and to work with students?
Well, let me say, clearly you're absolutely right about the independence of students at Berkeley. I mean, the ASUC, which is the Association of Students at the University of California, Berkeley, has since about 1910 had a tremendous independence and power and control over its budget, much to my dismay, I have to say, because I didn't always think they were spending it wisely, but they had control over it. There, as you say, students at Cal are relatively unique. Many of them come there because of the kind of activist history that the University of California has. David Hubin, who's here, was the president of the student body at Davis back in the wild days of the University of California. So I'm going to turn much of this over to him to deal with you folks, because he's had experience. But I think it's our place to talk constantly with you about these issues. You have, as students, a vested interest in the quality of your degrees. Your degrees will mean something if they come from an institution where the faculty are seen as among the best in the country. They won't mean much if the faculty declines, if we can't recruit the kind of people that are going to give you the kind of education that you deserve. So you have an interest, a very strong interest, in maintaining the quality of this institution and recognizing that that takes resources. I think it's dreadful that so much of the cost of education falls on the backs of students today. It was the reverse. It was just the reverse, roughly. When I was here, 1/3 of the cost of their education was borne by students, and 2/3 by the state, and that's completely reversed. And I think that's a terrible public policy for this country, and it is going to, I think, cost the country in the long term. But we have to work together to maintain the quality of the place, and that will mean, I think, in these times, that the revenue to keep this place strong is going to have to come from multiple sources, and tuition and fees are an inevitable component of that. And I hope the students understand that, because you have a vested interest in not just keeping fees low, but in coming out of here with a high degree, with a really valuable degree. So we will work together to keep fees as low as possible. Our proposal for, in the last legislative session, said that an independent board would not raise fees more than 5% without legislative approval. And so, that is that is a kind of commitment that's in that, not to raise fees excessively, and I don't think the legislature would permit us to go much beyond 5% if that was our commitment, or unless there was an extraordinary crisis. When I was president of the university, or chancellor of the University of California, Berkeley, we went 5 years without a tuition increase, which was a terrible mistake, because it necessitated, at the end of that 5 years, a huge increase in tuition. And it was extraordinarily unfair that the students who happened to have been students during that 5-year period paid much less than the students that came after them. They liked it, but it seems to me that we have to recognize that going without tuition increases for several years in a row only passes the burden of maintaining the university to a much heavier degree on the next generation of students. So we need to talk about that, and talk about it in a way that's fair to everybody, both previous generations and generations of students to come. And I look forward to working with the student body on issues related to the student issues, and certainly tuition fees are one of them.
Bruce Blonigan in economics. First, I'll say I love this university, and I'm very bullish on it long run. But I do have some short-run concerns, and maybe I'll just bring up two, one on the presidential search and then one just operationally. First, on the presidential search, I think everything we've been told by the governor and other politicians and the board is that really governance issues for the state are not going to be resolved to 2013. So the next president of this university that we hope to hire won't even know, for instance, who their boss, who has hiring, firing power over them. That to me seems like a real concern, and I'd like to get your sense of that, because of that, and there's obviously a lot more concerns beyond that, but that's a pretty important one if you don't even know who you're going to answer to. Mm-hmm. Second of all, I mean, you've been talking about how it's a great time to hire, and the fact that we're hiring is great. There's a flip side, which is retention. And if I'm not mistaken, we lost a lot of good people last year. We're looking at hiring market prices that for junior people who are straight out of PhD program, and we're going to have to offer them something above our associate professors who've been here 6, 7, 8, 9 years. And that is not good. And we've had, as you know, we're well below our AAU comparators. And so I would say that's more important even than new hiring in terms of maintaining our quality. And, part of the reason we've been told, at least, that, LeRiviere ran afoul and was not a team player is because he had the audacity to close the gap by a third with our AAU comparator. So that's a huge issue, and I hope you could address that.
Well, it's a very important issue, you cannot be that far off market and hope to be able to recruit the high-quality people that you want to recruit. You can't lose faculty in large numbers without it affecting profoundly the morale and the sense of the momentum of the university. Faculty departures can be like bank runs, where you lose a few key people and the other good people begin to think that their future is pretty grim. So clearly retaining and recruiting people, and I have to say, he paid a very high price, I think, for the salary increases, but he did the right thing. And I think that that's something that the people of Oregon have to know. It wasn't popular. It was technically within the bounds that were defined by the governor. There were no real bounds in writing from either the system or the state for that biennium. The limitations were imposed on this biennium, and those raises were given at the end of the last biennium. So I agree with you. There are ways of trying to do these things, and I don't think we can continue to lose ground over this biennium without losing the kind of ground that you've referred to. We start, unfortunately, the issue, however, I would also say, of salary compression that you referred to is not new. I came here in 1967, which was one of the most expansive periods of time in the history of the university. And we had salary compression. I came in at a higher salary than the assistant professors that had been hired the previous 2 or 3 years. And the people who came the years after me were hired at higher salaries than I was earning. So those of you who have been here that long know that salary compression is not a new thing. But it can't get too far out of line, or you really end up with a lot of bad morale. So it is something that clearly I'm going to be talking with the Chancellor and the board. You referred to the fact that it'd be hard to recruit a president when he doesn't know who his bosses are. I think that we will have to work to come out of the legislature, if it isn't to happen in 2012, with a clear path that can assure a candidate that the goals that we have defined for the university can be achieved in the 2013 legislature. I think that's going to be a critical component of our ability to recruit. Not knowing who that board may be in 2013, I don't think is a serious concern, would be a serious concern. No president comes in expecting the board to be the same a year hence or 2 years hence. Boards turn over. When I went to Texas, the board had been appointed by Ann Richards. When I left, it would have been appointed by George W. Bush. They were different boards, I have to tell you. So that happens.
Thank you.
Okay. This is probably our last question. We've got some other agenda here.
It's a short question. My name is Sean Lockery. I'm professor of the biology department and director of the Institute of Neuroscience. And I'm pleased, as I'm sure many of us are, that you share our excitement in being able to recruit so many faculty members, I think 35, at a time when other universities are shedding their faculty. More than approximately 2/3 of those hires that we have available to us right now are in the sciences. The Vice President of Research says budget for startup funds, which, as I'm sure you know, are essential to recruiting any science faculty, not just top-notch ones, currently stands at $500,000. To put that in perspective, the last faculty member assistant professor that we hired in my institution last year cost $1.3 million in startup. If you multiply that, or some facsimile of that, by approximately 20, we have a serious problem, an extreme problem, calling for extreme measures. What extreme measures are you willing to support?
Well, that's a question I can't answer here right now on the spur of the moment. What extreme measures am I willing to support? I recognize the problem. It is the case that much more than salaries, startup costs, at least in the sciences, are the biggest stumbling block, more than salaries, to the recruitment of faculty. It may very well be that we will have to spread out some of those hires. I don't know the answer. But I'm very conscious of the fact that our sources for startup funds are relatively depleted, and we're going to have to find the means of sequestering more in the years ahead, because it's going to be much more difficult for us to secure federal money going forward than it has been in the past, which means, to me at least, that we're going to have to carry new faculty perhaps longer with startup funds than we've had to carry them in the past. You're a biologist, a neuroscientist. You know that the average age of the first R01 grant that somebody gets from the National Institutes of Health is now 42. That's a staggering number. And it is because universities like ours are having trouble putting together the resources to hire, and more, particularly in the biological sciences, more and more young PhDs are spending 4, 6, 8 years, 10 years in some cases in postdocs positions. That's not healthy. It's not the way in which we will recruit the next generation of scientists for this country. So the problem you address is one that isn't unique to Oregon. It will seem unique to Oregon because the institutions that you may lose the competition for recruiting somebody are going to seem like they have more money, and they probably have, or they wouldn't win the competition for a recruitment. But I can assure you they're struggling, if they're public institutions at least, they're struggling to put together those startup funds themselves, because even when I was chancellor at Berkeley, and I was there in pretty good times, the startup costs were becoming more and more difficult, and we struggled with every recruitment and every retention to be able to put together those kinds of funds. So it's something we and I will be working with the Vice President for Research to try to figure out, and with the deans, because we now have a budget model that puts the money out into the colleges, as you well know, so that it becomes increasingly a dean's responsibility rather than a central administration responsibility to find the means of sequestering those funds. But we'll have to work together on it. That's all I can say. I don't have any back of the envelope, quick, easy solution for you. I wish I had. Okay. Well, thank you all very much. I look forward to working with you, and look forward to the year ahead. Thank you.
I think we can all agree that we have an exceptional interim president, and we all very much look forward to working with you, Bob, and to your leadership in the months to come, especially during this period of the presidential search, which brings us to our next agenda point. Today, we're fortunate to have a campus forum with Chancellor Pernsteiner and Allyn Ford, the chair of the Presidential Search Committee. And I'd like to let all of you know that we will have another campus forum conjoined with a Senate meeting on February 8th. At that meeting, we'll be talking about the qualities that we're seeking for in a new president. Today, we're talking about the search process in particular, but you're welcome to ask questions on any aspect of the presidential search today and also February 8th. I hope that all of you will join us at that second campus forum and Senate meeting as well. We'll begin with comments from Chancellor Pernsteiner, and which will be followed by comments from Allyn Ford, and then an opportunity for all of you to ask questions and make comments of your own. Chancellor Pernsteiner.
Thank you, Rob. Thank you all. I don't know if it's on. I guess it's on. Oh, it is on. All I have to do is actually sit up, which is something my mother always told me, and I wasn't particularly good at. So anyway, thank you again for being here this afternoon to share with us your comments and suggestions as we go forward in the search process. I'm very excited to work with President Berdahl. I took the interim off too, as we move through this process, in part because he can advise me and the search committee and the board about not only what we should be seeking, but who we should be seeking. and then to help us close the deal, as we might say. And so I am very, very excited about being able to do that. I'm going to first call on Director Ford to lead this off, and then he'll pass it back to me prior to the questions.
Thanks, George. First thing I want to do is make sure we all agree with President Berdahl that the Board of Higher Education shares his concern that our objective is to expedite the search process. We need and want to get a quality president in place as soon as reasonably possible. The board, I'm going to talk very briefly about an overview of what our search process is going to look like and turn it over to George. The board has appointed me as chair of the search committee. And what that means, the search committee will be working very closely with the Chancellor and members of the university, and we'll talk about that here in a minute. But our hope is to have somebody to recommend to the board as a strong candidate for their approval in June. So we're out to move and move very quickly. It may be appropriate maybe for me to introduce myself. I may be a stranger to many of you in the room. I have been on the board for 3 years, which frankly is just enough time to get me whipped into shape so I have some reasonable understanding of the educational system and the people that are engaged here in our state. I live in Roseburg. I'm in the family business, the wood products business. My connection to the University of Oregon is fairly strong. I married a super duck. When she talks, she quacks. She was the president of the Alumni Association here in recent years. Her name is Cheryl. And with our affiliation, I've been up to the university quite a bit, meeting with a lot of people, and I have a streak of green down my back. And of course, maybe some of you are familiar with our family foundation. We do a lot of work in the scholarship area and generally in the support of higher education in general in our state. So I guess my point is I have considerable experience, and my heart is with you in the fact of promoting higher education in our state, and certainly a little bit of green and yellow supporting the University of Oregon within that framework. Our objective as a search committee is we're out to move quickly. George is going to talk about things that are already underway. And if we're going to get a recommendation to the board in June, we have to move quickly. The task at hand is to get the search committee put together. Our hope is to have 20 members approximately. That's a little bit smaller than the search that we did last time, with the hope we can work a little bit tighter, a little bit faster. The present recommendation will be about 2/3 of the committee be made up people from this institution. So certainly, whether it be in the faculty, whether you be in students, whatever your role, you should have a strong representation on this committee. The remaining 70%, or excuse me, 30 or 40% or so is going to be made up of people like our donors, our alumni, our people that have been affiliated with the university for years, but I'm going to say they are all friends of this institution. So the hope is we have a group of quality people. They are available to function, and they will communicate with their various constituencies, and that is very, very important. We can't put 25,000 people in a room and make a decision. And so for a lot of reasons, we have to delegate, we have to work, we have to select, but we have to talk a lot. And the hope in our selection of these members on this committee that we provide everyone the opportunity in one way or another to be able to be engaged and watch and follow what takes place. Certainly when you're going out to hire somebody, it's a very careful process. We can't talk an awful lot because you're protecting people's privacy. And we also have to be able to engage various people and give them the ability to speak their part. So we're walking a very strong tightrope. But again, I'm very confident we can make this happen. I think one point is in our speed of trying to hire and bring somebody on board, the focus is on quality. Our hope is that we do have somebody to talk about in June, but if we don't find the right person, we will continue the search till we find somebody. So quality is number one, as I state by our friends at Ford Motor Company. So with that, I want to reinforce, and George will speak to it, we're here to listen And that's what we've been doing, frankly, all day, meeting various groups, and we will continue to do that, and we're here to answer questions. So with that, I'll turn it over to George.
Thank you, Allyn, and thank you for your leadership and your willingness to serve in this important role. Director Ford emphasized quality. We are seeking a top quality candidate to be the president of the university. We want to design a process that will result in being able to select a top quality candidate, hopefully before the end of the spring term. If that is possible to do, then we can meet Bob's deadline of trying to have him have his life back come the middle of September. And that is our goal. But we will not scrimp on quality to meet the timeline. I have been in consultation and communication with students, with Rob Keir and others on the Senate Executive Committee, and with others around the campus off and on for the past month to try to identify who might serve most effectively as members of the search committee. And one of the questions I'm going to ask you to think about today, not to give me the names at this meeting, but to think about whether you would like to add names to those that we are currently considering that I then can speak about with Rob and Ben and others next week in order that we can finalize the membership of the search committee by the end of next week. That's my goal. If you wish to do that, if you wish to submit names, please do so to Sana Andrews, who is the Vice Chancellor for Academic Strategies and who is our Chief Staff Person for the board on the search committee. And her email is Sana, S-O-N-A, underlined Andrews at ous.edu. And I've asked that she take those recommendations through this Friday so that next week I can have continued consultation with Senate leaders from both the faculty and the students and with others as we finalize who would be on the search committee. It is very important that the members of the search committee be people who are respected in each of the major constituencies of the university: the faculty, the classified staff, the officers of administration, the deans, the executive leadership, and I hope I haven't, the graduate students and the undergraduate students, so that these people can be effective representatives for your respective viewpoints, and you would respect the judgment that they bring to the recommendations that they ultimately will make to the Board of Higher Education with respect to who the next president should be. So as you think about making nominations, should you choose to make nominations, bear that in mind. As you send those forward, please note both the name and the affiliation and a little bit about the person in case it's possible that none of those of us who are putting this together will know them, so it would be good to know. Those who have already been suggested to me by the various constituencies that have talked with me over the last month, I have contacted those people and asked about their willingness to serve. But I've made no commitment to them that they will serve, merely asking whether or not they would be willing to be considered. And that's really what I'm asking you now for. Not that you are putting people on the search committee, but you are suggesting people whom I then could contact as to whether or not they would be willing to serve, and then try to make a decision by the end of next week as to who the committee will be. As Allyn indicated, the committee will have about 20 people. About a dozen of those will be from the faculty, staff, and students of the university. 7 or 8 of them will be members of the community, be they donors or alumni or other supporters of the university. It is important that we be able to have appropriate representation from all of the constituencies that are important to the success of a president, and that's why we are reaching out to various organizations, various people, to seek their suggestions as to who ought to be on the search committee. The work of the search committee is going to be concentrated mostly in the months of March, April, and May of this year. So if someone is in fact to consider being on the search committee, she or he should recognize the very intensive time involvement that that will require during that period of time. Because if we are to be able to have a selection by the time that the school year ends, the board has to make its decision by then, which means that all of the work of the search committee has to be well in advance of that. We are in the process of seeking a search consultant. About a month ago, we issued a request for proposals and sent it out broadly to dozens of search firms around the country to ask them to consider and to propose being our consultant, the advisor, if you will, to the search committee for this process. I'm pleased to say that we have a review panel who will look at those proposals. The proposals are due this Friday, the 13th. President Berdahl has agreed to be part of that review panel, as have two faculty members, Jerry Richmond and Ian McNeely, as has been Eckstein, and Sana Andrews from our office and Tim Black from the Office of the President. They will be recommending to Allyn and to me next week who they think ought to be the search consultant. That decision almost certainly will be made on the basis of several factors. One is the experience of that particular consultant in successfully recruiting presidents for AAU universities. The second is which principal in the firm can be committed to making that happen. And the third is the connection of that principal to the key leaders in higher education around the country. It's important that we get the right search firm and that that firm be adept at both finding and screening the top people in the country for this role. We will be inviting that firm to send its principal to the first search committee meeting. And I'm hopeful that the first search committee meeting will be around the end of January or the 1st of February, in advance of the campus-wide forum on February the 8th. We will also invite the search consultant to that campus forum. At the forum, which will probably have the kind of format that we have here, where we will have a discussion with the University Senate and Assembly, followed by an open forum, followed by the meeting with the Student Senate. So we will again, as we did today, meet with various of the organizations on the campus. The focus on February 8th will be about what qualities and characteristics should we be seeking in a person who would be successful as the next president of the University of Oregon. So think about that in terms of what you would bring in the way of ideas and recommendations and suggestions to that February the 8th forum. It is our intent also to establish a review committee sometime in March who would be made up exclusively of campus representatives who would in fact have a role in interviewing some of the finalists before they go to the board. And in order to get broader, not just broader representation, but a deeper understanding of the interaction of candidates with faculty and potentially with students. And so we haven't figured out yet quite how that's going to work. We had a lot of discussion about that at the Senate Executive Committee today. We'll have more discussion about that probably at the next meeting or before. So we will have also another group that we will not be creating until March that will be involved toward the tail end of this process, just as we may do with just as I just outlined. I think at this point I'm going to stop and just note that that's kind of the process that we have laid out. My hope is to be able to have by the end of next week the ability to name the search committee, which will be chaired by Allyn, who currently is its only member, and to be able also to name the search consultant. It's important to name the search consultant by next Friday in order to allow the required legal appeal process for those firms not selected to play itself out prior to the first search committee meeting, so that there's no question about who the consultant is at the time that we have the first search committee meeting. So on that note, I will turn it, Rob, back to you, I think.
Thank you so much for your comments. We will now have questions and comments from the floor. Would anybody like to begin? Please walk to a microphone and we'll recognize you at the mic. Please. I think you'll have to speak closer to the mic, I believe.
I had to improve my posture, John. Maybe they were.
Well, it says
There we go.
Yeah.
Physics professor emeritus, served under all but one of the presidents that President Berdahl served under. One of the things I have heard repeatedly over my 22 years directly in the central administration of the University of Oregon is the contention that somehow the success of the University of Oregon comes at the expense of other institutions in the system. I have not observed that to be true in any way that I can objectively point to, and in fact, as I look today at the University of Oregon, which I believe receives the least amount of state dollars per FTE student, I wonder how this myth is out there, and I wonder what you're going to say, Chancellor Pernsteiner, when this comes up again.
Well, thank you, John, for the question. The current resource allocation model is based, as you know, as one of its authors, on a few factors. You have the targeted programs, which are the specifically designated, and the legislature actually line items those in the LFO reports amounts, that are not denominated by student. And then you have the amount that are denominated by fundable student, based on the level of the student, lower division, upper division, master's, doctorate, professional, and the discipline of the student, low cost, medium cost, high cost. You know that as well as anybody. What has happened over the last several years is that the mix of students in the system has shifted. When President Berdahl was last here in the late 80s, about 30% of the fundable students in the state, under the way we currently construe it, were at the University of Oregon. Today, it's 20% or fewer. So you've had a shift as the other institutions have increased their resident students at a much faster rate than has the University of Oregon. And that's part of what's happened and caused the shift that you look at. If you look at total students, yes, the dollars per student are less at U of O, but total students include the non-residents and other non-fundable students. And you have the higher cost disciplines like engineering and vet medicine and pharmacy are concentrated at Oregon State. And so their number will look different because of that. But the model, in fact, is still functioning in the fashion that it was designed in 1999. It's just that we've had a shift in the students. I don't think that's the right way to fund going forward, but that's a different question.
But the question you answered was not the one I asked.
Oh, okay. Sorry, John.
The one I asked was, and I'll ask it a little differently to be very specific, do you believe that the success of the University of Oregon over the last 30 years has come at the expense of other institutions in the system, and do you see future success of the University of Oregon coming at the expense of other institutions in the system?
To the first question, absolutely not. If you were to look across the system today, all of the institutions, on virtually every measure, are more successful than they ever have been before. And I think you would be hard-pressed to argue that the success at the U of O, which is undoubted, has in any way harmed the other institutions. I would use that as a precept going forward, that however the changes roll out, be they governance changes or budget model changes, we make sure that we ensure to the best that we can that that remains the case. And that's, I think, one of the precepts that will guide both the board and even the governor and the legislature as they look at things. The success of the University of Oregon need not have any negative effect on any other institution in this state. We have, as a state, set a goal for ourselves, a very high goal for educational attainment in this state, that all of the institutions will have to stretch to reach. None of them need harm any of the others for all of them to be successful. And I think that's true too. Thank you.
I would just like to mention, I think many of us have heard from colleagues around the state, and many of us have read in the newspaper quite a few statements, some of them quite inflammatory, about just this topic. And many of us have been working for quite a few years to inspire some kind of understanding, I hope a large amount of understanding among the institutions in the state, that we're operating in absolutely good will, the best of will, that we want to collaborate, and we want each institution to be recognized for what it is and to be supported in that manner. We really need your help, Chancellor Pernsteiner, and we need the help of the State Board to communicate this, because so often we're villainized in the press and even among our colleagues at other institutions who don't understand what you've just expressed. If you could please express this in any way that you can to them, now and in the future, this would be a great help to all of us, because we're trying to do that in our own way as well. So thank you for any help you can give us in that regard. Next question, please.
I'm Randy Sullivan with the Chemistry Department. I'm an instructor. First of all, I'd like to thank you and Director Ford for coming down today. And I have a question about the choice of the committee, of the search committee, and who you're considering for it. You mentioned that there are several constituent groups who you're soliciting input from, the students, the faculty, and the classified staff in particular you mentioned. Many of these constituent groups are organized into governing bodies and have executive committees. The ASUO Executive Committee, the Faculty or the University Senate Executive Committee, and I'm sure the Classified Staff Union, the SEIU, has an executive committee that are all concerned in this. Given the authority which these constituent groups have delegated to their executive committees, are you giving greater weight to suggestions from the executive committees than from the rank and file?
What I have committed to do is that when I get all the names together, is to sit down with the leaders of those organizations and talk through those people. I do not know everybody on this campus by a long stretch, and so I don't have the independent ability to make a judgment as to how well that person, whatever the person is, might function as a committee member and how effective that person might be on the committee in representing the appropriate viewpoints from the different constituencies.
So I'm hearing you say that you will be consulting with those executive committees in the
I will
selection. Okay, thank you very much.
Just to be clear about the process, I want to make sure that everybody understands that from the Senate side, and according to my own promise to the community during the faculty assembly, actually both faculty assemblies that we had in December, I said I would be in close communication, giving updates, and then also doing outreach, which we did. I just want to make a note of that we reached out to Senate Executive Committee, to the Senate, and to the entire campus with emails through the Office of Communications of the University of Oregon asking for nominations. for the search committee, and many, many people responded, and the data was collected, and it has been very much in this whole process. So please know that if you put forth nominations, they've been received and they've been considered. And then the second phase of this, because we have a short timeline, is that you may, any one of you, please submit more names if you have them, or comments, to Sona Andrews, that's SONA_Andrews at ous.edu. And tomorrow, through the Office of Communications, we'll be sending a reminder about that, so everybody will have this in writing as well. So we're trying to make it as open a process as possible, and if anybody has any comments that they want to give to me as to how we can improve that from the Senate side, we're very happy to do that. Thanks. Next question, please.
John Bonine, School of Law, and pardon me for coming to the microphone a second time. But in Chancellor Pernsteiner, I very much appreciated the first of the two things you said, but I'm not sure that the second one was as clear as I would want it to be. The first that you said was nothing that the University of Oregon has done to make itself better has come at the expense of other institutions. That's great. The second thing you said is we should, as a precept, going forward, have the position that what the university does will not harm other institutions, that the university's success will not harm other institutions. And then there was a clause a little bit later. And just in terms of clarity, I want to point out that there are those who would say, for the university to gain a greater measure of independence will harm other institutions. So to have as a precept that nothing we do shall harm other institutions, I think, focuses on the wrong issue. The right issue is we shall persuade other institutions that things that are done for the benefit of the university will not be harmful because they won't be harmful. But that's not quite the same. So I want to make sure that we both agree, and I think we do agree, that structural change itself will not necessarily harm other institutions. I think we agree on that, do we? That structural change to enhance the university's independence, an independent board, the kinds of things that we've been talking about, greater financial responsibility within the university for its own future, those things are not per se being ruled out because they might harm other institutions, I would hope.
No, they're not. I mean, the issue here is not, I mean, I and no one else will prejudge what the right outcome should be. We are trying to do what is best for the state and the citizens of Oregon. That's what Senate Bill 253 laid out. They set out the goal. That's what we're striving toward. That's what the governor and the legislature and the board are all attempting to do. How we do that, what mechanisms we deploy, what resources we garner and from where, those are all to be determined. But there's no prima facie case to be made that says that on its face, one thing for the University of Oregon automatically is deleterious to anybody else. You have to guard against that to make sure that doesn't happen. But there's nothing on its face that, to me, says that there's anything that automatically does that. Now, if I'm misunderstanding the proposals...
No, I think we're on the same page. My concern was that your previous statement could be taken by some to restrict the very changes that many of us think are necessary and that I think that you believe are necessary.
We have a process that's underway now through the board's governance committee to be followed by what I suspect may be two processes, one through the Oregon Education Investment Board and one potentially through a legislative committee in the interim that will bring closure to these issues and to a proposal for the 13th session. That's what the governor outlined to the investment board in December. That's what we all are marching toward now. We are going to address the kinds of issues that you've talked about in those various forums. We started out this process in late 2009. The first fruits of it were the adoption of Senate Bill 242, which just 11 days ago relieved us of our status and changed our status from that of state agency to public university system. We have said all along for the last 2-3 years, there are more pieces to this. We're going to work through those issues, and we're going to come to additional proposals. The board has been clear that that will happen. They haven't known what those proposals will be. They're still being developed. But there's nothing that on its face is off the table. And that's, I think...
Thank you, but because you raised the question of the board's internal governance committee, I want to point out, as I mentioned to you earlier today, that the draft of November, produced by the board's internal governance committee for allocation of power between the state board and a university board, is, from the standpoint of certainly everybody in this room who might look at it, completely unacceptable. And so my question to you is there something that you can do or are willing to do to involve stakeholders in the discussions of the internal governance committee so that it does not remain completely internal to the board? My concern is not that that committee should produce a plan and then we should have a pro forma opportunity to make comments on it, but rather that at this relatively early stage you involve, whether it's President Kier, whether it's some other people, that you involve some stakeholders to actually work with the internal governance committee so that it becomes a stakeholders consultative internal governance committee. Can we do that? Can we change that process a little bit?
I will bring that to the governance committee as a suggestion. I think that we can find a way to involve a broader set of people in these discussions. Heretofore and in the current plan, we will be involving the presidents. And in fact, we will be asking the presidents to make additional comments both in the January and the February meetings. But I am certainly open to the possibility of involving others. We did that, as you may recall, as we crafted the original precepts behind Senate Bill 242. There was the president of the IFS, and then later on a different IFS member, as well as the head of the Student Association, were part of those discussions. And so clearly we have precedent for doing that kind of thing, and but I don't want to speak for the board without having consulted with the chair of the committee about how we might do that.
Thank you, and I think that would be consistent with the principles voiced by President Berdahl. I will also drop interim for the next few months, and hopefully that we will find a permanent, and if not, then we'll keep him on forever. But the principle of shared governance, which is very important from our charter in the university 140 years ago, is that having a university president's view is, in my opinion, not enough. That's why I ask you to involve, perhaps it's the Senate presidents around the state in consultation with the Internal Governance Committee, not only the university presidents. Thank you.
Thank you for your question and comments. We have time for one more, and then we'll have to move on with the rest of the agenda. I'm so sorry, but we are nearing the end, and we do need to finish by 5. Please.
Bridget Flannery, College of Education, and mine is actually, will be a very brief comment to the three of you regarding the process and the selection of the committee. As a previous speaker mentioned, there's different stakeholder groups, and all of those often have representative committees that you can check in with. I guess I'd like you to keep in mind that the faculty is a very diverse group of faculty, and in particular, we have tenure and non-tenure track faculty. And the Senate, as we all know, is a very strong body, but it also has non-voting members in the sense of the research faculty that are non-tenure track faculty. As a research institute, those non-tenure track research faculty are critical, and they should have a strong voice as well in the selection of the president. Thank you.
Thank you for your comment. We really appreciate it. And by the way, there is another forum at 5 p.m., and I invite everyone to attend in the Girlinger Alumni Lounge, and you'll have a chance to have an open dialogue. with Chancellor Pernsteiner and with Allyn Ford. So we invite you to join us then at 5 in Girlinger Alumni Lounge. And now we will proceed with the rest of the Senate meeting. But first I would like to thank the Chancellor and Chairman Ford. Thank you so much for your participation today. Also, as some of you are leaving, just to remember, February 8th, Interim President Berdahl will be addressing the community and the Senate again, beginning the meeting, to be followed by a discussion with Chancellor Pernsteiner and Allyn Ford. So we will repeat this process on February 8th, focusing on the qualities that we are seeking in the new president. So continuing with our agenda, next on the agenda is Nathan Tublitz, who will be discussing the Constitution and new policy making that is included in the Constitution. Nathan.
Thanks, Rob. I'll make this brief. I'm here to update you on a fairly important piece of legislation that was passed by the President and signed into effect by President LaRiviere. You know of one, and that's the Constitution, which actually is a significant increase based upon Rob's tutelage and leadership. We got that passed in December. Also in December, we got something passed called the Policy on Policies, which is a deadly boring name. But it actually has a really significant impact. And in short, what happened is that if you remember last year, we came to an agreement with the university administration that all university policies should come to the Senate for a review. That was an informal agreement, and the policy on policies, in other words, what is the procedure by which all policies should now go through the process of being adopted at the university, was indeed put into place as a formal policy this past fall. This is the flow chart, page 1 of the process, okay? Chris, can you scroll down? No, well, let's go back up just for a sec, Chris. So it starts over there in the upper left, and it goes through all the different groups who are proposing it, and it comes to the administration. But if you go down about 40 boxes to the next page, okay, this blue part in the middle on this side is all the Senate. Now, this is all new. The Senate never had, and that means us, the faculty, the staff, the students, classified, everybody, officers of administration, never had any input into this, but now we do. And so the process is now here. I'm not going to go through all of it, but basically the bottom line is that all policies on this campus now go to the Senate President. The Senate President chooses whether the policy has an academic impact. If it does, even indirectly, then it goes to the Senate Exec, which then decides whether the policy is important enough to bring to the full Senate. So, and then the full Senate votes on approving and adopting the policy. The policy actually does not get implemented until the president actually signs it, because the buck stops with the president. That is what happened in December. Also, the president, our past president, Richard LaRiviere, signed this policy into effect. It's a major change, and I want to thank the administration for working very closely to make this happen. This is a big deal for us. Now, the second part of what I want to say is that because of this change, there are now at least 5 different policies that will be coming to the Senate for discussion. 4 of them came to the Senate last year, and are still being in the process of being revised. One is the policy on research misconduct, which we approved, but now it needs to be updated again. The second one is the policy on retired and emeritus faculty, which was never adopted and now is going through the iterative process of being rewritten. The third is academic freedom, which we passed last year, but again was not adopted. The fourth is a policy on, help me.
Legislative, legal representation.
Legal representation, that's a new one. And this is an important issue, because when the state gave up some control of OUS, and OUS took it over, as Chancellor Pernsteiner mentioned, the control of the legal aspects of the university moved from the Department of Justice to OUS. And as a result, now there is an interpretation about who has the final say in legal decisions for the university. And so this is being brought to the Senate for review. So these are the issues that are up for discussion, and you will be seeing them sometime this year, I hope. Any questions? I want to end by saying these two changes that occurred, the Constitution change and the policy on policies, which actually are sort of the left hand and the right hand, we owe a lot of credit to our Senate President, who has done an enormous feat to make some of the values and the goals that we have had for campus governance come to fruition. So why don't you join me in thanking him?
And I'll say right back at you, Nathan, without your 2 years of incredible service as Senate President, the foundation that you set through so many hours of very hard work, including revision of the Constitution, which Nathan led, and the policy on policies, we would not have been able to do all of this. So thank you, Nathan. The next point on the agenda is Ben Eckstein giving a report from the ASUO on 2 different items.
Thanks, Rob. So I have a brief update on a few issues that the ASUO is working on right now, and then have an update on the EMU and Student Rec Center proposed projects. So there's a few issues in particular that the ASUO is working on, and these are, I wanted to highlight just a few of the more contentious ones, because those are the ones that I think it's most important for the Senate to know about. So we are embarking on the beginning of our budget season. The ASUO, for those of you who don't know, allocates $13 million approximately in student fees, and those are used to fund a wide range of services, from bus access for students to child care programs, to 168 student clubs and organizations, to football and basketball tickets for students, just a broad range of services and programs. And in particular, I wanted to highlight that the ASUO is working hard to renegotiate our agreement with the athletic department. So the athletic department, you could call it the Pentagon of our student government. It takes up 16%. Obviously, the Pentagon takes up more than that, but 16% of our student fee expenditures. That's more than any other part of our budget, and that has been growing over a course of years. We recently ended a 10-year rate agreement with the athletic department. That rate agreement 10 years ago took place at a time when the market for University of Oregon football and basketball tickets looked drastically different than it does now. And as you can imagine, that means the cost has skyrocketed since then. And so we are renegotiating those rates and have started negotiations which have been productive so far. And we're optimistic that we're going to see some significant savings to our athletics program this year and a lower rate on our tickets that we purchase for students. Another issue that fall term really was a major issue that ASUO confronted and continues to be one is the restructuring of the Office of Multicultural Academic Success. That office is being restructured into the Center for Multicultural Academic Excellence, CMA. And the ASUO executive has engaged to support a coalition of students that has developed to act quickly to protect services on campus for students of color and to ensure that students have a role in what the OMOS and CMA office looks like. And so the restructuring process began last fall with the disturbing lack of transparency and lack of student inclusion. And students have taken steps to ensure that students have a voice in that process. It has improved some, but students are continuing to advocate to make sure that that restructuring is inclusive of students and that students have a strong voice in what that office looks like. Another issue, and I think we updated you on this last term, but it continues, is the change in sexual assault reporting policies on campus. This is a really important issue, and it's not one that we talk about enough, but it deeply, deeply impacts a variety of constituencies on our campus. Our Student Senate last term passed a resolution which was co-sponsored by the executive that strongly objected to the university's plans to change its policies on sexual assault reporting to anoint almost all university employees, including students, as mandatory reporters of sexual assault. This issue is part of a national debate that's taken place over the balance between legal responsibilities of public institutions of higher education and the needs of survivors of sexual assault. And again, it's an issue where students haven't been included enough, and where we've been working to make sure that we can actually come up with policies that respect the needs of survivors of sexual violence on campus. This issue is, the national debate on this issue is so prominent that Vice President Joe Biden has even weighed in, differing with the interpretation actually that campuses like the University of Oregon have taken, in which the pendulum is swinging far towards the strictest view of our legal responsibilities and to the detriment of the interest of students who survive sexual violence. So we are working on that. The Office of the Dean of Students has finally said that they will put together a group of students to review some of these policy changes. But that's an issue that we will continue to update University Senate on, and we need all stakeholders, faculty, staff, and students to really watch these policies and be involved in protecting the needs of survivors of sexual assault. And then the other issue that I wanted to highlight as we look ahead this term are, again, issues of athletic department finances, not pertaining to the ASUO program specifically, but in general. We have continued to work with the Intercollegiate Athletics Committee, with a group of faculty and students and staff to push our athletic department for more transparency on its finances, and to call for an athletic department that contributes to the academic side of our university and doesn't take from it. And so that's a conversation that continues to happen. It's a hard one, but students will continue to advocate with faculty for some of those changes in the coming term. So those are some general updates, and do you want me to move straight into the EMU update?
That would be great,
okay.
Please.
So last term, and for some brief context, the ASUO ensured last June that no approval of new student fees for the proposed EMU and Student Rec Center projects would take place without a student vote in support of those projects. It's common practice for student building projects that this happens, but our university had pushed to move forward without a vote first, and students were successful in winning the right to vote on these projects. The road to a fall referendum on the projects was a bumpy one. Some of you probably read about it. The ASUO reached an impasse after months of negotiation with the Division of Student Affairs on a proposed memorandum of understanding that laid out some fundamental protections of student governance, student space, and student voice in the building design process. We postponed the election because we weren't able to reach an agreement. We postponed that election until we received the most basic commitments on those issues. And within a week, the Division of Student Affairs had agreed to sign the memorandum, and we rescheduled the election so that it could take place. An election did take place in the last week of fall term before finals week, and 57% of students opposed the fee for the EMU project, and 51% opposed the fee for the Student Rec Center project. Those were the results of the election, in which 4,700 students voted, which is phenomenal turnout for a special election. Our general election last year saw around 6,000 students, and the last special election we had saw under 1,000, so 4,700 students was impressive turnout. So where are we right now when it comes to these projects? Well, for one thing, the memorandum of understanding that we agreed to stands. It remains in place, and those commitments remain in place for students. One of the provisions was the creation of student steering committees to provide input into the projects and oversight. The committees will be beginning their work this term and starting to provide strong student oversight of the design process for both the EMU and SRC projects. We have to focus now on making changes to the projects as they are proposed. Students weighed in on the projects, and the overwhelming message was that students didn't want them as they are and didn't want to pay the fees as they were proposed. That means that the next proposal to come before students, because there will be one at some point in the future, has to be different. There are some within the administration who are working on these projects who would like to merely try again with the same exact proposal. But that's not an option for students because they weighed in and they said no, and now we need to respond to the concerns that students had about those projects. So there are two main concerns that we need to address and will be working to address this term to improve the proposed projects. First and foremost, we will be working to reduce the costs of the project. We absolutely have to reduce the costs of the projects. The next project that we bring to students for a vote has to be more affordable, and students can't afford a $100 per term project at a time of tuition increases. We have to pursue a funding model that lowers the costs, and it's not an option, it is a mandate from the students who voted on these projects. And again, for context, this is something that has been done at other universities. At Oregon State University, the projects, students did object to the cost of the projects, and a more affordable funding model had to be put in place, and it was successfully put in place. Secondly, we have to continue the process of returning control of the projects to students. The project should be the result of the vision and the ideas of the students who use and pay for those buildings. In a meeting with the EMU director last term, she called students the venture capitalists of these projects, and I agree wholeheartedly. It should be the creativity and the vision of students that lead these projects, and students should have ownership over these projects as the primary investors in the buildings. Our new student steering committees are an important first step, but we must ensure that they are taken seriously, that they have real power. In addition, we have to improve the current planning process. The user group that is overseeing the EMU design process right now has a large majority of non-students and 4 student members on the user group that is designing our student union. As a comparison, this is an uncommonly low student ratio. At the University of Washington, students represent 12 out of 16 of the members of the committees that are designing the project there. The user group is chaired by an administrator, and it is mostly appointed by administrators with just several members who were appointed by students, and of course, those are the student members. The user group has even operated at times in the complete absence of its student members. I did attend the last user group meeting, and there were no student members there for the part of the meeting that I was at, and yet the discussion and decision-making continued without students on the student union project. That's unacceptable. It's unacceptable under any circumstances, and the ASUO will not allow that to continue. We have to ensure that students are at the forefront of the process and not just an afterthought. And so we will continue to push for stronger student involvement, stronger student voice in these projects, and we need to have a process that is owned and supported by students. So those are our 2 primary goals that we'll be working on to improve these projects during winter term, and we would love to have the support of University Senate as we do that.
Thank you, Ben, so much for not only the report, but for your leadership. These are every one of the issues that you itemized, very difficult and complex issues, and I'm just so thrilled that the ASUO and students within the Senate, all of us working together, can address these in a way that really helps the student cause, and I will say student cause because you made that very clear today in the report. Thank you so much. Just to finish, I would first like to say that we will have a second Senate meeting in February. You can imagine why. On February 8th, the already scheduled meeting will, of course, be filled with Bob Berdahl's report, monthly report to the Senate, which is very important. And then following will be Chancellor Pernsteiner and Allyn Ford, again in a similar kind of open dialogue that we had today. But of course, that takes up quite a bit of the meeting, leaving us roughly a half hour or maybe 40 minutes for other business. So we're scheduling a second Senate meeting in February, and that will be on February 22nd, 2 weeks after the February 8th meeting, obviously. But please mark that in your calendars. It's really important that we have full attendance for February 22nd meeting. We'll be dealing with only Senate business at that time. It will not be conjoined with a campus forum. We'll be sending that to you because we're scheduling the rooms and we're verifying it. So we will definitely be sending that to you. And I will, of course, be sending you that information I spoke about earlier in the meeting relating to where you can make more nominations, how you can make more nominations for the Presidential Search Committee, just as a reminder. One last comment. I hope that everyone, if it's possible, will join us now in Gerlinger at 5 for the open discussion with the Chancellor and Allyn Ford. It would be great if any of you would like to participate. We don't know how many will be attending, but please feel free to join us and to participate. It's very important that we have that contact with the Chancellor and the Chair of the Presidential Search Committee. Do I hear a motion for adjournment? Second? All in favor say aye. Opposed, nay. Abstain. Before you leave, please sign in if you have not already done so, and we are now formally adjourned. Thank you so much for your participation.